Welcome to Strata. I'm Glenn.
And I'm Brandon. Welcome to the Minds on Muscle podcast. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Minds on Muscle podcast. Glenn and I are here with the world-famous saxophonist, Mr. Jacques Henri Taylor. Jacques, how are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing great. World famous indeed. World famous indeed.
Absolutely. The funny thing is, right before this, I asked if he played trumpet, and he said, no, sax. I'm like, no, saxophone. That makes perfect sense. Way sexier instrument for a very handsome 37-year-old Mr. Jacques.
There you go.
So honestly, Glenn and I have a million questions we'd love to ask you because you're someone that's been doing this for a few years and you have an incredible academic background on top of practical application, which I think a lot of people could really benefit from learning about.
Cool. Yeah. Well, I'm happy to share. Fire away.
Wonderful. So, Jacques, the last time you and I spoke in person, it was at Force in the Nervous System 1, and it was here in Toronto. And I think one of the most fascinating things that you can ask any seasoned exercise professional like yourself is how their process has evolved over the past few years. Because as people who are in this industry and we're so enamored with growth and how we can improve things and help our clients, it always helps to reflect and review, hey, how did I change or how did the people around me change? So I'm curious, in the past 5 years, how has the way you've worked with people evolved?
That's a great question. In the past 5 years, I think I've had the opportunity to slow down enough to really see not only what's working really well, but seeing like kind of the holes, the voids in what I was doing, limits in my thought process, limits in my expectations. And I would say one of the biggest differences is that I felt a lot more comfortable embracing aspects of neuroscience that I typically shied away from. Things like really understanding the relationship between the environment that someone is coming into for working out and how that affects their performance, how that affects their recovery, how it affects their ability to have some of these experiences that create the adaptations that we want to see. How just the environment can strongly influence the physiological response. I'll give you an example. If exercise is supposed to be something that reduces stress, and you have an environment that is nothing but stressful, right? Sorry, it's not going to work, right? Now, that doesn't mean that you have to have incense burning and the lights have to be all low and you have to have on your FM smooth voice. I'm not saying that at all, but we do have to pay attention to this environment depending on what this person wants when they walk through that door and what they need when they walk through that door.
That's an awesome kind of lateral question. I would have not have thought of even asking you, but when it comes for you to design your environment and tools that you choose and perhaps people that are even immersed in your environment when your clients are around, does that influence your decision making? And if so, how do you lean? Which way do you lean to try to create an environment that promotes the adaptations that you want with your clients?
Yeah, well, there are some things that are highly individual, and I can't go, changing the color of the walls and the temperature of the lighting and all that for everybody who walks through the door. But what I'm paying attention to are very simple things of when I ask somebody, what do they enjoy about the experience of exercise? When you've had a good experience of exercise, what did it feel like in your body? And by the same token, what are some of the things that you absolutely just don't like? They're just sensations that you don't like. You might think that they're good for you, but you really don't like it, all right? And as you start to understand what those things are, then you can start to customize the experience based on that. You can even do stuff like, you've got someone who says, hey, look, one of the things that I'm trying to deal with is right now I'm in a mid-management position. And I want to get a promotion. I've been passed over a few times because what they keep telling me is I'm brilliant at the day-to-day stuff. But whenever there's a real stressful crisis, I tend to be useless. I kind of shut down and I get kind of aggressive with people and it's not my best look, right? And so you go, okay, so in other words, if I create a scenario in this gym where they're feeling a lot of pressure, they may start to shut down and withdraw and not give me the information that I need in order to help them progress. So there's a couple of opportunities we have here. We can either say that's the way they are and that's where they're going to be, or we can say, hey, do you want to see if you can shift that, come up with different responses to stressful situations? Because we could try some stuff on here. We could create some scenarios here where you're going along, things are great, everybody's executing. Then there's a little bit of a challenge, and you have the opportunity to go, now here's what I usually do. And that doesn't work out for me. I'm going to try a different behavior, see how that works, right? So we have this opportunity to, again, create this entire environment that's not just salubrious or beneficial for the body, but man, your mind is engaged and you're actually chasing some of the things that you want in your life.
So I have a follow-up question to that. When you're working with people, do you then deliberately try to help them improve their life in the areas that they feel are the most stressful or they're having the hardest time with, but filtering that in through the lens of we're going to exercise to do that? Because that sounds like what you might be doing, or maybe I misunderstand or mischaracterizing, which if I am, I apologize.
And I can't hear you at all.
Oh,
there
I'm
you go.
sorry.
Now you're back.
We're back. We're
now,
back.
Now we're all back. Okay.
If worst case scenario, I mean, this hasn't happened in a while, but if it freezes, we'll just re-ask the question and just kind of go from there. We can edit it in the back end.
Okay. Yeah. Re-ask the question because it kind of got cut off toward the end there.
It's probably for the best. I'm not sure if I did a great job asking it the first time. All right. So the follow-up question is that I was curious if you work with people who deliberately need or want help improving aspects of their life, but you help them through the modality of exercise. I don't want to say it's almost like a therapy, but it sounds like you can help. It sounds like the way you're juggling it and the way you're working with people is someone in this, for example, mid-level management position wants to move up. You're trying to figure out, okay, how can I help this person learn to manage themselves under stressful situations so that they can exceed themselves in an area of their life that they're having a hard time in?
You hit it right on the head. Now, here's a really important thing. This is a really, really important thing, that I only do that by invitation, right? And if somebody comes to me and says, hey, look, I'm a mid-manager. This is what I do when I get stressed out, and that's the way it is. And oh, well, okay, cool. That's your business. No judgment. Maybe we'll avoid those things here because that's the last thing that I need for you if you're coming in here for stress relief. But that person says, no, Jacques, that's an obstacle for me. I got to figure out how to do something about that. Otherwise, I'm not going to get what I want. Right? Now, here's the other exciting thing, guys. And this is like really near to my heart for a lot of reasons. But if you think about, if you ask any psychologist, any therapist who deals with substance abuse disorders, right? They will say this person must exercise. And it doesn't always work out very well. Sometimes you create another obsessive situation and people go, well, that's okay. At least they're not, hitting on this. It's like, no, but they're destroying their bodies and they're actually starting to wreck parts of their minds, right? You're not really looking at a holistic situation here. So what I think is really cool is I don't need to be a therapist. I don't want to be a therapist. I don't need to know the trauma of your life as much as what are the behaviors that you're trying to develop. And then we can create scenarios in here. I don't discover it for you. That's not my job, right? That is the job of the therapist to say, this person, this is their trigger. And when they're triggered, these are the emotions that come up. And when these emotions come up, these are the behaviors. Then I get to go, okay, so we're going to create the scenarios where these emotions might arise. And then we'll create an opportunity for this individual to go, here's what I usually do. I don't like the way that usually turns out. I'm going to try this over here. Now, guys, I'm going to take a big step back because this is important too. When people first come to see me, they are not ready for that. Just like when people first come to see you who say they want to do CrossFit, right? And you go, okay, I can get you ready for that, but you're not ready for that right now, okay? Right? Let's say that that's just the bee's knees. CrossFit is the goal. You got to do it. But you can get them ready for that. The same thing. If you want to train someone's mind, you first have to get them to be mindful. So the first thing starts with one of those things we do back in RTS, and that is, I want you to only pay attention to the sensation in this stuff. And as the sensation changes, I want you to tell me about it. And if you find yourself starting to think about that stuff, I want you to go, oh, Jacques, my brain just started thinking about something else. bring it back to this stuff, or tell me why it went to the other stuff. Are you feeling pain there? Are you feeling right? Or did you just start going, oh crap, I forgot to schedule that meeting? Come back. And the better they get at doing that, now we can start to explore some of those other things, because they will have built up this skill to recognize where their brain is going. If you don't know how your mind is shifting, you can't train it. All right.
That's incredible. I mean, I didn't even think we'd be going this direction. I think it's actually incredible that the conversation you're talking about is this, like instead of the juxtaposition between redirecting addictive behavior to addictive exercise behavior, you're actually talking about not just doing that, even though it's really about, well, how do we modify your behaviors, so to speak, to some extent, that what you're doing, you're thinking about it and you're present, and you're not necessarily going to go 110% towards cheesecake or towards exercise or towards cigarettes, which is incredible. I mean, you probably have clients who've been with you for many, many years. Do you find that those clients, because I've heard people talk about that once you have an addictive behavior, the anatomy of the brain's changed such that it's almost impossible to get away from that. Do you find that you're constantly working with people to keep them present in the exercise session to work on that behavior? Or do you see a point where it actually carries over and it's influencing their life outside of the time with you?
It absolutely carries over and influences their lives away from the gym, right? That does take time, and it's very specific to the individual. I want to see if I can think of an example that wouldn't be inappropriate to share. The keys come with again. I don't even need to know that. The situation that creates the trigger where people typically want to use. But if they understand the feeling that comes up, right? What's the feeling that comes up? I feel sad and hopeless, okay? And incapable, right? So now I can start to think about, okay, how do I sneak? What would that look like in an exercise scenario, right? Maybe we need to do a small group thing where we're all doing this. We've decided that we're going to go up this mountain face, and we're taking our map and compass, no cell phones. We got to plan out how much food we're going to take, and we're going to start at maybe at nightfall, add a little bit of an interesting thing to it, and have this person be the leader and see what happens when we get a little bit turned around. And they're just sort of like, wow, this hopeless feeling comes up. What do you do, right? Do you want to retreat and escape? Well, we can't. We're all here together. So what are we going to try on that's going to be different? So you get to try on these behaviors that you go, this totally works for me. And it's not an obsession. It's a response to a specific emotion that you're feeling, right? And now you have another way of managing it other than going, I got to escape, or I have to destroy, or I have to, whatever the behavior is that comes out of that emotion that leads you to want to use.
It sounds like that neuroplasticity that we're always talking about and hearing about emotion, right? Is building that over time, right? And I mean, I think all three of us are probably familiar with the law of repeated efforts, that you have to, present the system with a stimulus a certain amount of times before that pathway really becomes carved out. Do you find that, perhaps it depends, but do you find it takes the people that you work with a very long time to start coming up with new behaviors when they're faced with their problems or their roadblocks?
It depends, man. It really depends. And the reason why I say that, and I don't mean that in a cop-out-ish kind of way, but think about this. Think about the person who says, who for whatever reason, this could be a shoulder injury, it could be back, it could be anything. It could be just the whole body just feels like crap. And they go, I want to feel better. You go, awesome, that's great. And what are you going to do when you feel better? I'll be able to get back to work. I'll be able to da-da-da-da-da. And they're all like, they seem all jazzed about it, right? And so you leave it there. You do the work with them, but what you start to notice is that every now and then they seem to be going really well, and then they'll cancel for maybe 1 or 2 sessions, and they'll come back strong, or they'll get this injury that really makes them have to they'll keep coming in, but they have to really pull back on the sessions, and you feel like, am I wasting my time here? And one thing that you forgot to look in on is when you are well and fully capable and energized, what are some of the things you're going to have to take on that you'd rather not take on? You don't want it. You don't want that responsibility that's waiting for you. You don't want that crappy relationship that you can no longer avoid because now you can't stay at home anymore, right? You don't have that excuse. If you can't get that deep, then you can be working with people for years trying to understand why do they prefer to be a little bit sickly and not at 100%, because they get to keep coming to see you. Sometimes that's the thing that they think. They think that when I'm fully back here, I won't be able to treat myself and have someone help me take care of me, right? So I think a lot of it has to do with your ability to be curious and keep asking the questions that really get to the fundamental thing of, yes, you say you want this, here are the obstacles in front of it, but once you get it, do you realize there's a whole set of responsibilities there? And some people realize it and they're like, yeah, and I don't want any part of that. So
I mean, it's the kind of conversations it sounds like you're having with your client, Jacques, are conversations that I think a lot of exercise professionals would never even dream of approaching. So, I mean, first, I applaud you on that. I mean, listen, I never considered, at least until now, going that deep with my clients. And I'm curious, how do you go about approaching these conversations with your clients? Is it just very casual, or do you ask them to come in a little bit earlier before a session, be like, hey, here's some stuff I'm noticing. How do you think about it? How do you approach these conversations with people that, could be delicate, or it could be a sore spot for them?
yeah, I typically don't have them come in early. I just don't have that luxury in terms of the schedule. That's part of it's part of the time that we spend, either in the studio or virtually. And the questions they really don't feel heavy. The implications are heavy, but the questions don't feel heavy. It doesn't feel heavy to go, hey, so what's standing in the way of your progress? Or, hey, so once your ankle is great and your back is awesome, right? And you no longer need to have a caretaker to come and grab your kid. What's that going to be like when you now have to do all that? And they're like, oh yeah, geez, I never thought about that. Yeah, well, let's start thinking about that, right? Because that could sometimes undermine your going forward if you feel like, oh no, I will no longer have the help that I need, right? Maybe we need to just discuss that so you can go, of course you can still have that help, even when your foot and your knee are feeling better. That's okay, right? Of course you can keep coming on in here and working with me. Of course, right? This isn't just for people who are hurting, So it's these conversations, they're not that deep, man. To me, it's like the deep stuff happens in therapy. And I am not about that. I'm just not, I don't want to know that stuff. It's not that I don't care, but I'm not qualified. Right.
The mechanics of those personalities and those emotional connections to how the body's feeling or what they're hearing when they're in their home environment or at work, it absolutely is important though. I mean, it's like the ingredients, like we talk about the exercise equation, and we think of it as such a mechanical, almost binary, this resistance, this motion, this position, but then you do have those hard to grasp emotional pieces. I mean, I always make the jokes with my clients that if you didn't have a personality, this job would be much easier. Because you could just you could mechanically, like a rocket science or a car, you could build some pieces. But then as soon as you add this thing up here that has some freedom and imagination and emotions, it gets tough.
I completely agree with you. And one of the things that again, this was like part of the past 5 years for sure, is I kept thinking to myself, I was taking on this big responsibility of making sure that I was creating something that people enjoyed, or that I could Jedi mind trick them into doing something that they hated, right? And that's a big load, right? Like every single hour, here's so-and-so, they hate this and they hate that, but they got to do it. Here we go. What's going to work this week? But then I was like, hey, wait a minute. Hold on. Maybe I can invite their genius to the show. Maybe I can invite them to really tell me what's going on the inside, right? And so I came up with this idea of mind flow, right? Instead of mindset, having a mind flow, right? Because mindset is like this thing was like, I've got to have a positive mindset. There's a shitstorm happening, but I got to have a positive mindset. Come on, right? It's not necessary. But the key thing is that wherever your mind is, that it can flow to where you might need it to be, right? So the idea is I can walk in and be going, Jacques, I'm drained. I had a crappy day. I'm stressed out and I'm finding it hard to focus. Okay, that's cool. No problem. I'm not going to tell you, well, cheer up. Well, you should count yourself fortunate. You don't have COVID and you got both legs, right? It's nothing like that. It's here you are. You're feeling like that. That's fantastic. Oh, well, not fantastic, but I get it. All right. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to start over here with this exercise. This is something that you've said that you really enjoyed in the past. And remember, the whole goal of this exercise right now is just to give you a little bit of energy. So we're going to do this thing that my man Brandon has been talking about for years called post-activation potentiation. We're going to do some of that right now, and that's going to give you this little shot of energy. We'll give it a shot, and that's our goal. Okay, so here's what I'm going to do. We're going to do this exercise. When we get done with it, I want you to tell me how satisfied you were with the experience. Right? So then when we do it again, if you weren't satisfied, you get to go, let's see what we can do a little different that will actually improve your satisfaction. And it's not all on me. They are willing participants in the whole deal, right?
I want to ask you about something you just said there. You talked about this idea of mind flow, and I'm excited in a couple minutes to get to your academic stuff that you're working on in your teaching. But in all of my musical drum practice, when I was studying more jazz and music, there was this thing, and I'm sure you've heard of it for being yourself, but this idea of flow mode, that you can enter and you can pick a scale, a rudiment, and play it in all these different subdivisions at any time, and just, pick up a piece of art, a paintbrush, a saxophone, a drum, and you can just go and practice going and not worrying about the destination, but just flow. And I always, for my clients that are similar that I would say that you've described, I always try to urge them to get into some sort of creative flow habit, because if you can build that flow mode in something that you resonate with, painting, art, driving, whatever it is, that it makes it easier to shift that flow mode into other parts of your life. Does your mind flow, does it come from that creative world at all, or can you see a connection there at all?
I see the connection. And you're making me think that it makes me want to come up with another word, because I really appreciate the flow that people are talking about. And that, I think, is a degree of mastery, right? Flow is understanding your world, your milieu enough that you let your curiosity and your sense of curiosity carry you, right? And no matter the decision, there's not a good or a bad. It's just and here's the result, and here we go. We get curious about it, right? But that is a little bit different from that's related to, but it's different from this idea that I recognize that my mind is in a certain state right now, and right now I realize that I might not feel capable of doing that thing over there. But as long as I'm not doing things to try to hold on to my mindset or to be dishonest about my mindset, right? And I let my mind flow, right? That's the thing, is people think that emotions like sadness or even happiness, that we can do things to hold on to them. Can't. And the more we do that, it just creates another level of suffering, right? So there is a relationship between what you're talking about. And yes, what a wonderful feeling, right? That creativity flow. What a wonderful feeling. And as you mentioned that's just, wow. I've never experienced that in a gym before. I've never allowed myself to be that free in a gym before.
Well, to you, this is I like that. That's interesting. For you, if you were to go into a gym, pick up some weights, do something, what do you think you would have to experience to enter this kind of exercise flow mode?
A level of confidence that, it's because, wow, that's tremendously personal, but I have such a tenuous relationship with my body image that it's almost like I'm afraid to do something that's not going to contribute to the thing that I want. Right? So that's highly constraining in terms of the stuff that I'm willing to spend time doing. Dude, so that's a big thing that's a massive thing for me, but that's a big thing for our clients too. Mm-hmm. I don't want to do anything that's not going to head me in this direction. When as I'm thinking, I was like, well, dude, there's a million things that could take you in that direction. So just play. Wow.
It's all, that's also
Thank
the
you.
burden.
Thanks, guys. Holy crap.
Hey, well, honestly, thank you for being so open and chatting with us. Really appreciate it.
Wow.
It's also interesting, the burden of technicality, because the more we dive into how we look at moment arms and everyone that we work with, their own individual mechanics and our own individual mechanics, it constantly becomes this conversation of like, how do I optimize? How do I make this exactly for my body? And it's all about the body, the physical, and not ever really about, what do I just want to do today in the gym just to have fun? I don't remember the last time I just exercised to have fun. I really don't.
And at the same token, we all, at some point, like, typically toward the end, we're like, man, that was awesome. Right. So it's interesting. It's interesting how what a wonderful experience it would be to start closer to there as opposed to just ending there. Because the question that I have for myself right now is, am I saying, wow, that's awesome because it's over?
Yeah.
Dang. Okay. That was a 10th set of, back squats. Oh, that was awesome because it's over. Because it wasn't awesome in set number 2.
It's funny you say that though, because so many people who do like CrossFit and circuit style training, like I would say 95% of the people that I talk to that do those insane aerobic burst cardio classes hate it when they're doing it. It was torture. It killed me, but the heart rate was going down. I had to keep going. And then they say exactly what you said at the end. Oh, that was awesome. Let's go get cheesecake. But it's weird that that's kind of the norm with exercise. It's got to be this repent, this purge, this evil cascading thing that turns into this reward at the end that it's done. And that was great.
Yeah. And the thing that you guys have really totally inspired me. And I'm like, I can't believe that because that's the experience that I create for my clients is they actually enjoy it from the start to the finish. And I watch them when we talk about it, and they have this whole thing about how was that satisfactory or whatever. And I just don't do it for myself. That's crazy.
Yeah, it's tough.
Wow.
There is. No. Oh no, please, Jacques, please.
I was just going to say one other thing is that like, this is something that I feel like Brandon, we were in a conversation years ago about this, maybe with a few other trainers too, where we were saying that even as exercise professionals, we need a trainer, right? And it's not so much for the form, but it's because of stuff like that, where we go, hey, dude, are you having fun here? Or did you go into your little cave and you're just, doing it? Because I see you're not letting anybody else in your world do that. Why are you doing that? So sorry, I didn't mean that. So sorry.
No, it's a great point though. I think that having people in your world, and this is where, this is maybe a conversation for another time, but for someone like yourself that I would say you're kind of like a studio owner nomad where you've got all this amazing stuff going on, but you're kind of your own person in there. And that's, one thing that I applaud you for doing, but I don't know if I could do, because for me, with everybody here, like Glenn and Taylor, they really hold me accountable and get me excited. And also question, instead of going, hey, I'm going to go do something crazy with this deadlift, I hear them talking like, you know what, I really should rethink this. I should really think about this, how I normally teach it to my clients. And I think that's an incredible thing, which comes back to the culture thing you said at the very beginning of this episode.
I really appreciate. I admire you guys for coming together as a team and creating that environment. That I'm so jealous. Yeah, you're right. I am like, it's me, And what's really interesting, I think I found a gym. I'm going to be meeting with a guy I think next week, and from everything I've read, his writing style seems like it's going to be awesome, and I certainly hope so, because I'd like to have a team, and it really helps to have a team for sure. Yeah, you guys.
Well, if it doesn't work out, you can move to Canada. I'll spend all the money to build 1,000 square foot loft on the other side of the gym. And you can just have your own thing. I don't care what it costs. Glass windows. You come down. You just rent free. You just chill here. We got you, man. It'll be good.
Cool. All right. Sounds good. Yeah. Add a little nursery on there. We're good, man. Yeah.
Yeah, me too, man. I'm in there too. So
That's right.
A little housing above.
Yeah.
I love all the stuff that we're talking about, but I'd love to talk a little bit more about the academic stuff, if that's okay with you,
Of
Jacques.
course.
So, back 5 years ago is when FNS1 and FNS2 were available, and now you're starting to move into, I guess the program is called Neurologic, right? Neurologic Training. And I'm curious about, A or B, if they're different courses or how it flowed from FNS to what it is in its iteration today, Neurologic Training.
today's word of the day is
Awesome.
flow.
Flow.
Yeah, flow. So, Force in the Nervous System is still a course, and I call it the Immersion Series because, and that was kind of a pandemic-inspired thing where it's instead of trying to break it up into practical and lecture, I guess, just seeing if we can combine the two. So it's more of an immersion series, and the part of it we haven't been able to do though is have people come up to Maine or come down to Maine and get after it outside and do some really cool things in the lab with surface EMG, with these MOXIE sensors, looking at oxygen saturation. And the only thing, the in-person experience really lends itself well to some of the mind training kind of stuff, right? That's really hard to just talk about, right? You can nod your head about it all day, but like you got to do it, right? At some point. So that's the Force in the Nervous System. And right now we're wrapping up the second, series of FNS, the immersion series. That'll be over at the end of this month, and then I'll kick off another one probably in June, be my guess. Then neurologic training, what that is more of a, that's the culmination of Force in the Nervous System. So you take all this neuroscience stuff, all this exercise science stuff that's running around in your head, and how do you then use that information to design an exercise from the nervous system's point of view, right? I think that the training that we've all had with RTS, where you're designing an exercise from the muscles and from the joint point of view, right? And then if you go off to like the American College of Sports Medicine, they will allow you to train an exercise or design an exercise from the cardiovascular system's point of view, right? What about the nervous system's point of view? What about the way the nervous system moves as you exercise or doesn't move, right? What about the way your mind influences physiology as you exercise and vice versa, yeah? So it was taking all that information and going, if you've got all this stuff running around in your head, this is how you start to design exercises, right? Coming up with, so mind flow is one of the principles. Another one is designing the first repetition, right? Just how do you design that very first rep? And that falls under this category called neuromuscular tuning. And then the other one is designing the very last rep. How do you figure out what the very last rep is going to be? What's going to determine the last rep? Just the number 15 or complete failure? Is that it? Is that all we got? Right? And then the last part is that satisfaction component of how was that a satisfactory experience? What are we using to say that was satisfactory or not? So that's a relationship between the two. You get all the neuroscience stuff, and then you go, okay, all right, my head's full. And for years, I thought that's all people wanted. Just tell me the stuff. You'll know what to do with it. Like, you guys are different. You cats knew what to do with it. But most folks are like, okay, so now I have a dumbbell in my hand. Now what? I can tell you about moment arms, but you're telling me there's something more than that. Yeah. And here's what you can now start to consider, which will have an influence on how the body manages those moment arms.
That's amazing. Honestly, incredible. And so I have a question I want to ask you about this, but is your program, the Neurologic Training, is that where you bring in the MOXIE and the EMGs and you try to have conversations about all that tech as it relates to the experience and the individual and the mechanics?
Yeah. So we go through that stuff a bit in FNS too. I introduce people to the technology, what it can and cannot tell you, right? Because there's still tons of papers being published about using surface electromyography in a completely erroneous way. or just people, influencers who went out and bought one and they feel like they can now tell you that definitively that this is better than that. It's like, oh,
Yeah.
so it's trying to, in a constructive way. I'm never, mentioning names or trying to embarrass anybody. It's just trying to be constructive and give people information so that they can be informed consumers and informed professionals. In the neurologic training, I would say maybe, I'd say about 50% of my clients have to interact with the technology. A lot of them never do, right? Half of them never do, right? It's everything from the assessment to the exercise design to the interface with technology is completely specific to the individual, right? So everybody doesn't even have the same assessment, right? So yeah, that's kind of the flow of those things.
Amazing. And so you brought up something that's what I wanted to ask you about is I have seen this reductionist style determinism approach with the influence of using some of these tools in which they apply them in a specific context or methodology, usually for a specific adaptation. And they'll put them on and say, this exercise for your biceps is terrible. This exercise for your biceps is good. This exercise is great for deltoids and it's a shoulder press, but doesn't involve your traps. And it's very, to me, outside of and so from my narrow lens of not, because I don't understand the technology enough to really speak to it, but I've seen that it really that there's an emphasis on specific muscles, and again, kind of this step backwards that I know that we've all evolved from with specific divisions of muscles, with an insinuating hypothesis that this movement is the best for this. And which is again like a step back in my opinion. And second, that this movement's going to yield a very specific hypertrophy adaptation.
Right.
And I've seen so much of it from different people. So I would just love to know, like, does any of that? What are your thoughts on that stuff?
I typically like to take them one at a time, right? So if somebody says, "Hey, look, I read something that says that this is the best exercise for it," I was like, "Let's bring the paper up. Let's check it out," right? And manage it that way. But I guess I'll give the broad strokes of the misunderstanding. Is that surface electromyography, when you have an electrode sitting on the surface, all it can do is it's gathering information about the tissue that's right under the electrode, right? Okay, so what does this mean? This means that it's only penetrating to a certain depth, right? I'm sure some of the people who are talking about this stuff might not realize that. But not only that, let's think about what's under that sensor. If my arm is extended, like, if my elbow is extended, and I go to flex my arm, the tissue that's under the sensor is going to change. So if you're unaware of that, you might make some erroneous assumptions about what's behaving and what's not behaving, right? And the long and the short of head of this tissue or that tissue. It could be even the same muscle, but you might have different fibers under that sensor as that tissue lengthens and shortens. You might have the distance between some of those fibers and the sensor changes as the muscle lengthens and shortens, right? So these are all things that you have to kind of think about in terms of how is this person interpreting their data, right? If somebody is completely aware of that, they typically will have a much more nuanced and specific interpretation of their data. What else can I tell you? The big things there.
Well, there was actually with you yourself, there was an experiment that you did, and you were doing straight arm, palms up, front raises, and you talked about in your post the kind of the cascading recruitment that you saw from anterior deltoid to more biceps. And so that I was rethinking about that before this, and I was wondering a couple of things. I mean, one, does that influence your training? And two, as it relates to hypertrophy, say you were trying to work on shoulders, is there a point of diminishing return with sets and rep schemes as there's an amount of oxygen saturation levels and it switches over?
Yeah, and I see. So there becomes the other part. So what EMG can help you see are changes in muscular participation as you move about. But to compare one muscle to another to say that this is greater than that takes an additional step of measuring, right? So you would need a standard that says this is 100% of this muscle's effort in this position. This is 100% of this muscle's effort in this position. Now we're going to do that exercise in this position, and we're going to see what percentage of this guy is working and what percentage of that guy is working, right? I should have said A and B because no one can see what I was just pointing at. But the idea is that you're going to need some type of a reference if you really want to make any calls about muscular participation in an absolute way, right? But you can say, I'm seeing this muscle's behavior change as we're going through this range, right? We could say that. But to your point about the O2 saturation, that's a really, really big deal. It's a big deal because we can have scenarios where someone is, we're looking at the surface electromyography and we're seeing an increase in signaling. But when we're looking at the MOXIE data, we're watching that tissue, instead of starting to continue to desaturate, it's starting to resaturate, which might mean that tissue is no longer really generating as much force, but the nervous system is still calling on it, really, really calling on it, right? So at that point, you might want to say, I don't know if this person really should be doing this anymore. We're getting a whole lot of signaling, not a lot of effort. Maybe it's time to call it done, right? So the cool thing with the MOXIE sensors is they really do give us a window into maybe being able to say when enough is enough, both from desaturation point, and then when you resaturate, are you able to come back up to your resting, or we'll call it warm up levels, right? Did you guys get some of those sensors, MOXIE sensors?
Unfortunately, not yet. COVID-19 has limited our research expenditure, but it's something that's on the radar for sure. I'm excited about the stuff I've seen you doing, and then also Lou DiCello has been playing around with it, and I'm seeing it's getting me excited. I would really love to dabble in that more.
It's really, I would say it is the most applicable thing from your people who are trying to get, I'll call it return to play, right? You know, all your folks who say, yeah, I had this surgery, I've done my physical therapy, I'm working with you guys because they say I'm 100%, I know I'm not, let's go. To people who say, yeah, I want to change the look of this muscle, right? Why am I not seeing this muscle change in this exercise? Well, let's see how it's being used, right? The other thing that I want to bring up about this technology, and I know this is like some weird tangent-y kind of stuff, but I have been blown away by how much sensation is misleading. I have been blown away by it. Like exercises where I'm just going, man, that was all about my vastus medialis because it was screaming at me. And when we look at the data, it's that vastus lateralis. It's the one that's just absolutely bottomed out in terms of its oxygen saturation. Like I won't feel a thing. When's the last time you felt your vastus lateralis?
Oh, I don't think I've ever felt it.
No.
You see what I'm saying? Like it's weird. It's weird, right? Like how is it that our brains are wired to go, I will let you know that this tissue over here is working its tail off. You don't need to know. You don't need to know about those guys.
Yeah, I never gave that any thought, really. It never occurred to me like that the body would lie, because you think about it from an evolutionary perspective. It's like, well, why would my body lie to me about what's fatigued? Why would it tell me that this is fatigued when it's not? What would be the reasoning for that? I have no idea. I'm just starting to consider it now. I've got no idea.
We're still evolving. I don't know.
Evolving right now.
Yeah. No, I don't know. I don't know why we have why there are certain tissues that where we feel it. And there are other tissues. I've never felt my gemellus, never felt my piriformis. Don't think I felt my soleus proper. The list goes on, right? It's really interesting when you start to have ways of observing things that don't rely on just what somebody feels. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Very interesting. Jacques, the idea that you've come up with that you were sharing with the neurologic training, I mean, it sounds like really a huge, like a fruition of all the things that you've learned over the last few years, several years, decades even, and put it all together to create some more practical application. If you don't mind me asking, perhaps such a broad question, but who in the exercise professional world is the neurologic training system and your program for?
Ooh. That's really interesting. The way I look at it is that it is it is it's a useful add-on, right? If you are designing exercises from the point of view of the musculoskeletal system, right? And if you're designing exercises from the from the perspective of the cardiovascular system, and you find yourself as an exercise professional feeling like you're still cajoling your clients to come in, right? Or you're watching people achieve some type of success and then leave, right? And they come back and they're put the weight back on again. And you're like, oh, no problem. I knew they'd come back, because we get along so well, blah, blah, blah. Or if you're finding as an exercise professional that there feels like there's something lacking in terms of your investment in your job. Like, that was my greatest fear. It was a really hard thing for me to embrace this. And this just started 5 years ago, that I could call myself a personal trainer. I wanted nothing to do with it. Nothing to do with it, right? Because I'm like, I'm not stupid. I'm not vapid. I care about more than just the way, body fat. I care about more stuff than that. I was like, well, then why does everything you do just focus on that? But there's this whole other thing, right? There's this whole other thing. So who specifically? I don't know. I think that there are some symptoms that it could help you with. Like if you're experiencing these things, it's a great tool. But I think that I think it is the way to not the way. That's not the wrong way to phrase it. But when I think about the reality that if you go to any doctor with any issue, whether it's depression, high blood glucose, high cholesterol, whatever, anxiety, the number one thing that they recommend is exercise. But it works for so few people. It works for so few people, because if it really worked, everybody would do it, right? So I think that if we can solve this juggernaut of exercise being this one size fits all, or this thing that you have to slog through, I think more people will do it.
Yeah.
Love it. Jacques, if you're okay, I'd love to put a pin in today. But I do have one last question, because you have a level of profound knowledge and experience, I'd say wisdom, with everything, and taking the exercise mechanics, being a communicator and educator, being an artist, being someone who's explored neuroscience, and you continue to go down that road. If a personal trainer that's never heard of you before were hearing this episode, and you could offer one, this sounds so cheesy and reductionist, but one piece of practical advice to them to help their business and or clients, whatever, something that's close and near and dear to you, is there something that comes to your mind?
Yes, develop a sense of curiosity. Develop an honest sense of curiosity. Why am I doing it this way? Right? How was that really for you, my client friend? Right? Did that suck? Yeah. Well, let's see. What could we do to make that a little bit? Develop some curiosity. That's the biggest thing. Right? Anything that you're certain of, get curious about it.
I love
Get curious about it, man. That's like, I don't know. That's something that I carry with me like everywhere. Glenn, do you have kids?
No, I do not.
Oh, okay, all right. Brandon, you can attest to this. That like there are no words to describe what that these little beings are like. There are no words for it. But having some curiosity about how are we going to make this happen? Because I know my old frame of reference will say that this is impossible, but here we are. So let's get curious and let's figure it out, And
there was something you said in one of the courses about children, and you said it about 5 or 6 years ago. It was one of the first times, and I don't know if you will remember this, but you talked about how amazing it is to watch like real-time motor learning happening with a child, and you see this little person, and they try to go and grab something, and they don't have quite the depth perception, and then you watch them do it again, and they overshoot it, and then they figure it out, and you're watching them interpret their physics like right away, and then all of a sudden they do it the first time, and then they do it again, and they do it again, and I think that that's one thing that you can see with a puppy and a baby and any of these small, new living things, interpreting their world, you can learn so much from that. And if you just are paying attention, you can start seeing that that's not a novel thing to young people. It's just apparent because they're exploring all these things. We're doing this. We're stumbling through life. We're figuring out podcast microphones and cameras and stuff. And there's this constant exploration. And once you have it, you have it. And I love all that.
Can I just say one other thing? This is the other thing that I would say is, because it really ties in nicely to what you just said. That thing that we watch people do, right? Exploring something new. What's really cool is when you are having somebody do an exercise, and I know you guys do this, you set them up in such a way that they don't know what's coming next, right? They can't just say, "Oh, do a crunch." No. And what I want you to do is move your rib cage toward your pelvis, right? So as you're doing things like that, you watch people do that same process of learning something new, of trying to do it a different way than just the old way of, "Oh, you want me to just do a crunch?" No. That's why I didn't even say the word. We did this whole setup and they're like, "What are we going to do?" Ooh. Right? So there's something interesting about trying to set up these scenarios where people get to explore like that over and over and over again. Yeah.
There's no growth without curiosity. And Jacques, if people are curious about where to find you, we'd love for you to let them know.
Cool. There's a little rock that's in your backyard. Just look under it. I'm just kidding. What's wrong with you, Taylor? Yeah. No, if you go to exercisedesignlab.com, you can get a hold of me there. I need to get down with the Instagram thing, but you can also find me on Instagram under the Exercise Design Lab. Those are the best ways to get a hold of me.
And of course, you can't forget www.neurosaxophone.com because ultimately that's where they're going to see your hit album right there.
Or just neurosax for short.
Neurosax. That's right.
Hey, that's right. Jacques, thank you so much for being on this episode of Minds on Muscle with us. Honestly, I think we could have you again and really explore some of these programs because you've got such a depth of knowledge and experience. I think that there's so much that people could benefit from. So thank you.
Oh, it's my absolute pleasure for both of you guys, Glenn and Brandon. It's so good to see you, and thank you so much for what you're doing for our community.
Well, thank you and same to you, honestly. I mean, I think, I have a quote that I've told Glenn and everyone here. It's like, alone we go fast, but together we go far, which is that cheesy African proverb. And I really believe that as much as it's kind of cheesy and overplayed, it's really true. And I think we're all doing the same thing. We're just pushing forward and people can jump on and learn some crazy stuff about saxophones and flow mode.
I love it. Yeah.
All right, man. Thank you. We'll talk to you soon.
All right, guys. Okay, you bet. All right, take it easy now.